I woke up to a shocking confession from my son Ryan that nearly broke my heart. It was a quiet Saturday morning, and I had just stepped into the warm bath to clear my mind. The bathroom was filled with the soft scent of lavender, and steam gently swirled around me. I closed my eyes for a moment, thinking of the day ahead, when I heard a soft knock on the door. At first I thought nothing of it, but then I heard his voice. It was faint, trembling with a mix of fear and something else I couldn't yet understand. His words hung in the air like a puzzle I couldn't piece together. I listened closely, trying to catch what he was saying through the closed door. His tone was very different from the cheerful greetings I was used to. There was a seriousness that made my heart race. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, as though I was about to learn something that would change everything. The sound of his voice next to the door was the first real sign that something was deeply wrong. I stepped out of the tub slowly, wrapping a towel around myself as curiosity and worry battled inside me. As I reached the bathroom door, Ryan's words became clearer. He admitted something I never expected to hear from him. He told me he felt a deep desire to be more than just my son. He wanted a kind of closeness that I thought was impossible between us. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I remember thinking, how could my child say something like that? My mind raced with questions and fear. What was happening in his little heart that made him say such strange things to his mother? I felt like I was stuck in a moment that didn't make sense. There was a mix of shock and a strange kind of sadness. I couldn't tell if he was joking or if he was serious. His words were filled with emotion, and I knew he wasn't lying. At the same time, I felt that something was off. Ryan seemed to be reaching out to me in a way I had never thought he could. I slowly opened the door, my heart pounding so loudly I thought he might hear it. When I stepped into the hallway, Ryan stood there looking small and lost. His eyes were wet, and he looked at me with a mix of hope and fear. It was like he was carrying a huge secret, and his confession was only the tip of the iceberg. I didn't know how to respond right away. My mind was swirling with thoughts. Had I done something without realizing it that made him feel this way? Was there something missing in his life that made him see me differently? I wrapped my arms around him, feeling how much he trembled. He let out a shaky breath, and I knew that he needed comfort, but also that I needed to understand what had just happened. The next few moments were a blur of confusion and concern. I tried to speak gently, asking him why he felt that way. His explanation was like walking on a tightrope of delicate feelings. He talked about feeling lonely and sometimes wishing he could be closer to me than ever before. At first, his words sounded like a child's misunderstanding of love, a misunderstanding so pure that it seemed innocent, yet so deep that it gave me pause. His feelings were tangled, and I wondered how to untangle them without hurting him. I realized that I had to listen, but also be careful with what I said. As the minutes passed, I began to see hints of something more complex behind his words. He mentioned times when he felt like no one understood him, how he often felt alone even when he was with friends or at school. There were moments when he saw me as someone who could fill that empty space. His desire wasn't just about being close physically, but about seeking a kind of emotional connection that he hadn't found elsewhere. I could see the pain in his eyes as he spoke, a vulnerability so raw that it tugged at my heart. I knew this was more than a simple misunderstanding of affection. I didn't want to push him away because that might make him feel more alone, but at the same time, I needed to set boundaries to protect both of us. The feelings he expressed were confusing and too heavy for a young heart to carry. I remembered a time when he was much younger, clinging to my hand for comfort, and it struck me how much he had grown, and how his needs had evolved in ways I never expected. Now, as he stood before me, he was sharing a secret that felt like a breach of our normal bond, but not in a way that was easy to label. There was an edge of desperation in his voice as he confessed more. He said he admired qualities in me that he wished he could find in someone else, a warmth, a kindness, and an understanding that made him feel safe. The way he looked at me, It was like he was seeing me in a new light, one that was both comforting and confusing. This was not just about being close, it was about wanting a relationship. Overstepped the boundaries of our mother-son bond. My heart ached for him and for the closeness he craved. But I was also terrified of where this could lead. I thought back on our past conversations, trying to see if there had been any signs of his growing confusion. There were moments he seemed to seek more of my attention, small hints in his behavior that I had brushed off as normal kid stuff. But now, hearing his words, I realized that maybe I had missed something important. I felt like I was holding two pieces of a puzzle, his growing feelings and the reality of my role as his mother. How could I navigate this without hurting him or losing the respect of our bond? Ryan looked up at me with tears glistening in his eyes, and I knew he had poured out something he felt deeply. His confession had left me with so many questions. I didn't fully understand why he felt the way he did, and I wasn't sure how to help him now. The situation was heavy, with a mix of love and confusion, like a storm cloud on the horizon that I wasn't sure how to face. I reassured him that I was there for him, but inside, I was bracing myself for the difficult conversations that would soon follow. I knew that something had changed in our relationship, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to accept that change. At that moment, while I held him, I felt a strange mix of protectiveness and fear. There was an invisible line between us that I sensed had been crossed in a way that should never have happened. Even though no physical harm had come, it felt like a promise had been broken up. Promise of certain roles and boundaries I thought were unshakable. My mind raced with memories of him growing up, of our shared laughter and tears, and now confronted with this unexpected twist in his feelings. I felt like I was caught in a web I couldn't escape from easily. The air felt thick with unspoken words. I wanted to ask him more, to find out exactly how he was feeling and what he needed from me. But I knew I had to be careful. Too many questions might make him shut down, but too few and he might not feel heard. I decided to slow down and let him speak more, hoping that as he continued, more pieces of his heart would reveal themselves. His next words were slower, more hesitant, as if he was choosing them carefully. It was then I realized that this conversation was not going to end quickly, and that the road ahead was going to be long and filled with delicate moments. He whispered that sometimes he felt more comfortable sharing things with me than he did with anyone else. That simple statement made me feel a pang of guilt for what was about to unfold. I wondered if I had ever made him feel so safe that he confused my care with something else. My mind was swirling, trying to keep track of my own feelings and his needs, and I knew that I was at a critical moment in our relationship. I had to choose my words carefully to avoid hurting him, while at the same time addressing the deeper issue of his confusing feelings. Even though I was scared and confused, I felt a strong urge to listen and understand. I knew that Ryan was trusting me with something very personal, something that he probably had never told anyone else. That trust was heavy with meaning, and I didn't want to break it. I wanted to protect him, but also help him find a way to deal with his feelings in a healthy manner. Yet I also felt a protective instinct for my own boundaries, wondering how I could maintain them without pushing him away. As we continued talking, I tried to ground the conversation in love and safety. I told him that I loved him more than anything and that nothing could change that. I assured him that even though his feelings were confusing, they were important, and we needed to understand them together. I promised him that we would work through this, step by step, even if it meant facing some hard truths. My voice wavered, but I kept it steady, hoping to give him a sense of security, even as my mind was filled with swirling doubts. I thought about how this conversation might be perceived by others, how it might fit into a bigger picture of trust or betrayal. The idea of infidelity in a relationship with my own child was so strange that it felt like a twisted kind of love that was not supposed to exist. I felt like I was holding a fragile vase, trying not to let it slip from my hands as I balanced my love for him with the need to protect the purity of our bond. The fear of crossing a line made me hold back from saying things that might hurt him. But also knowing that we couldn't ignore what had just been said. The more he talked, the more questions I had. I wondered if Ryan had been feeling this way for a long time, or if it was something that had just begun to simmer up. I wondered what had sparked these feelings, or perhaps something I had done without noticing. His trembling voice made it clear that he was scared of losing me or being judged. Yet he felt compelled to tell me something so painful and complex. I could tell that he needed comfort, and I desperately wanted to give him that comfort, but also needed to think about how to address these feelings responsibly. There were moments when I felt tears welling up in my eyes, not just because of the shock, but because of the deep love I had for him and the fear of losing our trust. I remembered simpler times when a hug was all that was needed, when his problems were small and the world seemed safe. Now, his problems were big and heavy, and the weight of his words made my heart feel like it was encased in ice. Yet, even in that cold, I found a strange warmth, an anchor of hope that maybe we could find a way out of this confusion together. As the conversation stretched on, I could sense that this was just the beginning of a long journey. I knew I couldn't solve everything in that moment, but I hoped that by being open and honest, I could start to mend the cracks that had begun to form between us. I kept reminding myself that despite the shock and the unsettling feelings of betrayal, in a way, my love for Ryan would guide me. I needed to find the strength to face whatever came next for both of us. The smell of the lavender still lingered in the air, and the sound of water dripping from the faucet marked the slow passage of time. I gently placed my hand on Ryan's shoulder, feeling how much he needed me right then. I promised him silently that we would take this one step at a time, that I wouldn't abandon him even when things seemed overwhelming. My heart still felt heavy, but I sensed a glimmer of hope that through this difficult conversation, we might find a way to heal the pain and confusion that had unexpectedly entered our lives. In those quiet moments, I saw Ryan look up at me with a mix of hope and uncertainty. There was so much unsaid between us, and yet the bond we shared was strong enough to carry us through this storm. I wished I had all the answers right then, but I knew that the truth would come out slowly, through many talks and gentle guidance. As we stood there together, both of us wrapped in a silence filled with worry, I realized that this was not just about a strange wish he had said, but about a deep need for love, understanding, and truth that we both had to face. When I first sat down with Ryan, I felt a mix of fear and sadness. It was a moment I never expected, and I knew my life was about to change in ways I could not imagine. I looked at him, trying to find the right words, and I could see tears welling in his eyes. My heart beat fast, and I did not know if I was strong enough to face what was happening. In that quiet room, I could feel the weight of his words hanging between us. He whispered how he felt so lonely, and missed the caring presence of someone who could truly understand him. I listened, but my mind raced, trying to process these difficult emotions without letting too much slip out too soon. As I tried to calm my racing heart, I wondered how our bond reached such a confusing point. It was not something I could have planned or prepared for. Ryan had always been a sweet boy, but his feelings now seemed to touch a part of his heart that needed attention. He spoke with a voice that trembled slightly, and I could hear how much he was hurting. The room seemed to close in on us, and I struggled to find a way out of this emotional maze. I knew right away that his feelings had roots in a deep sense of loneliness, and his search for comfort led him down a dark path. But what could I do to guide him back to a healthier way of loving? I tried to remember a time when our relationship was simple and happy. We used to share jokes, laugh at silly cartoons together, and he would run to me with his arms open after school. Back then, everything was clear and loving. Now when he spoke, his words were muddled with confusing love that did not belong in a mother-son bond. My thoughts were a jumble of hope that we could work through this, and the fear that we were already too far gone. I needed to hold on to hope, even though I felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that the right thing was to listen carefully and show him that I cared. Even if his feelings seemed strange and wrong, he was still my son. I tried to speak in a calm voice so as not to frighten him more. "Ryan," I said softly, "I hear you. It sounds like you are very lonely and confused about what you need right now." His eyes widened slightly, and there was a moment of silence. I could tell he was startled that I understood his pain. It felt like a tiny crack had opened in the wall between us, and I hoped that might be enough to help him let go of his confusing thoughts. Ryan nodded slowly, his face wet with tears. He continued, "Sometimes I feel like I want more than just your love as my mom. I feel like I need someone who can be with me in the ways I can't explain." His words left me with more questions than answers. What did he truly mean by that? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I let him speak at his own pace. I knew that rushing him could make things worse. But as he spoke, I realized this was more than a simple mistake. There was an emotional distance between us that was filled with unspoken needs and fears. I felt a lump in my throat. I wanted to comfort him and reassure him that he was not alone, even if I had just uncovered a secret that might change everything. I told him gently, "We can work through this together, one step at a time. I love you, and I want us to find a way out of this confusion." He looked at me with a mix of hope and fear, and in that moment, there was a spark in his eyes that made me wonder if he was ready to change, but also a shadow of doubt that made me worried about what would come next. As we continued talking, the conversation took unexpected turns. At one point, Ryan asked me why he felt this way. I admitted I did not have all the answers, but I promised to help him figure it out. He seemed to find comfort in knowing that we would face his feelings together. It was a small victory, a sign that our bond was still strong enough to overcome this strange challenge. However, the more he opened up, the more I realized that this was just the beginning of a long journey. Every time he told me about his feelings, I saw a flash of pain that spoke of deeper issues he had not yet shared. I found myself wondering what other feelings he might be hiding. There was a moment when he hesitated and then whispered, "I feel like I am betraying you by having these thoughts." That admission broke my heart further, and I reassured him that he was not betraying me by being honest. I could not help but feel responsible for creating an environment where he felt he could only express such confusing emotions. I needed to create a safe space for him to explore his feelings without judgment, while also protecting both of us from the harm that could come from this emotional chaos. During one of our conversations, Ryan began to draw pictures in a notebook. He drew images of us sitting together, looking sad and lonely, surrounded by dark clouds. These pictures spoke louder than words sometimes. They showed me that his loneliness was not just about missing a friend or a family member. It was a deep, aching void in his heart. I looked at his drawings with tears in my eyes, feeling a shared sadness that bridged the gap between our ages. Each picture was a piece of his heart laid out on paper, and I wondered how I could help him fill the emptiness with light again. The days passed slowly after that heart-to-heart. Ryan would sometimes catch me off guard with a quiet moment, his eyes filled with questions he dared not ask out loud. I learned to read his expressions carefully, picking up on when he felt distant or overwhelmed. I tried to be patient, understanding that his journey would have ups and downs. There were moments when we laughed over silly stories from his childhood, and other times when the weight of his feelings made it hard to even say goodbye at the door. All the while, I maintained a careful balance between supporting him and setting boundaries that we both needed. I felt a growing determination to find someone who could help us navigate this tangled web of emotions. I remembered that a trusted family friend had always given me wise advice in the past, and maybe they could help now. But I hesitated, because I was unsure how much to share. I did not want to reveal too many details too soon, not until I was sure it was safe for Ryan. I feared that talking to someone might upset him or make him feel betrayed. Yet, the thought of reaching out to someone else was both scary and a possible beacon of hope. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, I gently brought up the idea. "Ryan, I think it might help us to talk to someone who understands these feelings," I suggested quietly. He looked up at me, eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and fear. "Do you think so, Mom?" he asked softly. There was a pause, and then he nodded slowly. In that nod, I saw his willingness to try, even though he was scared. It was a small sign of bravery in the face of a situation neither of us fully understood. We decided to seek help cautiously. I started researching therapists who had experience with complex family emotions, someone who could help both of us without making our secret too big of an issue. The next few days were filled with careful planning and hushed conversations. I made phone calls, asked questions about their experience with sensitive family matters, and tried to choose someone we both felt comfortable with. I wanted Ryan to feel safe and heard, and I hoped that with the right guidance, we could mend our relationship without losing ourselves in the process. One morning, I woke up feeling a mix of hope and dread. It was the day of our first meeting with a therapist. I remember looking at Ryan as he got ready, his small hands trembling slightly, his face a mask of uncertainty. I could not help but wonder if this decision was the right one. What if talking to a stranger made him more upset? I held back my fears, putting on a brave face for him. I told myself that this step was necessary, even if it was scary. When we arrived at the therapist's office, I could see Ryan gripping my hand tighter than ever. The waiting room was cozy, with soft chairs and calming pictures on the walls. I felt a bit of relief when we were asked to wait in a private room. I whispered, "We'll be okay, Ryan. We are doing the right thing." His wide eyes and small nod gave me a little comfort. As we waited, I tried to find words to explain why we were here, but they felt clumsy and insufficient. I was overwhelmed by the mixture of emotions that filled the air between us. The therapist greeted us kindly, and his calm voice eased some of the tension. I sensed he had dealt with similar struggles before, which gave me a bit of hope. Ryan clung to my hand, but I felt a surge of gratitude that we were taking steps to heal together. The therapist began the conversation by asking us how we were feeling, and I noticed the curiosity in Ryan's eyes. He wanted to understand what was happening, but was also scared of the unknown. I tried to reassure him, saying that we were here to learn and to feel better. The therapist's gentle questions guided us through our feelings slowly, helping us name emotions that we had been too afraid to voice. As the session went on, I saw glimpses of Ryan opening up a bit more. He talked about his loneliness, his fear of being unloved, and how his feelings towards me had become a confusing mix of love and longing for something he lacked. I listened carefully, nodding and letting him know that his feelings were real and important. I did not judge him, even when his words felt heavy. Every word he spoke helped me piece together the puzzle of his heart. I realized that his feelings were not just about me, but about the deeper need for love and understanding that had been missing in his life. The therapist suggested some small steps for us to try at home, activities that might help Ryan express himself without crossing dangerous lines, and ways for me to support him. I felt a glimmer of hope as we left that first session. The path ahead was still unclear, but we had taken the first step together. I walked Ryan to the car, and on the drive home, I kept the conversation light, asking about his favorite game or a book he had read. I knew that the road to healing would be long, but I was committed to guiding him every step of the way. Over the next few weeks, our home became filled with gentle routines and small moments of reconnection. We started a nightly ritual of reading a story together, something comforting and innocent that reminded us of happier times. Ryan still had moments when his thoughts seemed burdened by confusion, but we also found moments of laughter and simplicity. These little pockets of happiness were like rays of sunshine, breaking through dark clouds. Each day, I saw Ryan slowly opening up more, telling me about his day at school, his friends, and little adventures he had. He was starting to understand that our relationship, while complex, could grow stronger through honesty and patience. I learned to be more attuned to his needs, listening closely to the quiet hints he gave when he felt lonely. There were days when he would hesitate before asking for help, and I would sense the fear of rejection or misunderstanding. In those moments, I would gently encourage him, making sure he knew he was safe with me. One afternoon, as we were walking in the park, Ryan suddenly stopped and looked up at me with a serious face. He said, "Mom, I think I understand a little bit more now." I was scared, but I feel like I am not the only one hurting. His words were simple, but they carried so much weight. I felt tears welling up as I nodded, understanding that this was a turning point. Our journey was not going to be easy, but we were beginning to find a way out of the darkness. This new understanding did not erase the confusion completely, but it planted seeds of hope in both of us. I promised myself that I would always listen to him, that I would help him find healthy ways to cope with his feelings, and that I would never let him feel alone again. Even when we faced setbacks, I remembered that we had taken important steps together. The mystery of his feelings was still unfolding, but we were on a path that brought us closer rather than tearing us apart. In these moments of quiet reflection, I often thought back to that time in the bathtub, when Ryan first revealed his troubling feelings. It seemed like a lifetime ago, yet it had set us on a journey that neither of us could have predicted. I kept reminding myself that this was not about blame, but about healing and understanding. Every new day brought new challenges, but also new chances to grow and to love in healthier ways. As I sat by the window one evening, watching Ryan play with a small toy car on the floor, I felt a bittersweet mix of relief and lingering concern. We had come a long way, but our journey was far from over. I knew that the road ahead would still have unexpected turns, and there would be days when my heart ached with uncertainty. But I also knew that together we could face whatever came our way. Ryan was learning that his feelings could be managed, and that he was not defined by his confusion. I was learning that sometimes the hardest moments could teach the deepest lessons of love and resilience. It was in these quiet, small moments that I found strength. The curious glances he shot me when something made him think, the way he would shy away when he felt overwhelmed. All of it taught me more about him and about our need for healing. Even though our story was filled with pain and unexpected twists, I held on to the belief that our love as family was strong enough to carry us through. Each day was a new chance to rebuild trust and redefine our bond, slowly but surely moving away from the shadows of those confusing feelings toward a brighter future where trust, honesty, and care led the way. I still sat in my living room, my hands trembling and my mind racing with questions. The words I had just heard from Ryan echoed in my head. I knew I needed help, but I felt so alone and scared. The situation was confusing, and I didn't know where to turn. How could I be so close to someone who felt this way? The answers were not clear, and the silence in the house felt heavy. My heart pounded as I wondered what to do next. I reached for my phone with a shaking hand, knowing I had to call someone I trusted. I dialed the number of my closest friend, Sarah. From the moment she answered, I could hear the warmth in her voice. I told her what happened, trying to keep my voice steady, even though I was not sure how she would react. Sarah listened carefully, never interrupting. As I poured out my confusion, fear, and guilt, each time I spoke, I could feel a heavy weight lifting a little, but the questions only grew larger. She promised to help me think through this, and her calmness was like a balm to my troubled heart. I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time that day. Sarah suggested that I needed to understand Ryan's feelings without making him feel judged. She reminded me that sometimes children express deep emotions in confusing ways, and that it was important to talk to him with love and care. Her words sparked a small light in my mind. Maybe there was a way to guide him, gently away from harmful thoughts. But how could I do that without making the situation worse? I hesitated, wondering if I was ready to face all of this head. I asked Sarah how I could be brave enough to have another talk with him, to reach out and be honest about my feelings without hurting him further. The call with Sarah lasted for a long time. She offered many ideas, each one like a small piece of a puzzle. We talked about listening more than I spoke, about finding a way to let Ryan share his feelings openly, while I gently set boundaries. I learned that I needed to balance my own emotions with caring for his, not letting my fear stop me from being his mother. Still, I felt uncertain and my chest tightened with worry. Could I truly understand what he was going through? Would he trust me enough to share more? These questions spun in my mind like leaves caught in a storm. After hanging up with Sarah, I sat quietly, thinking about our conversation. I realized I needed to talk to Ryan again, but in a different way. I needed to listen with my heart as much as my ears, to let him feel safe enough to share his feelings without fear of judgment. I thought about the gentle things I could say, things that would show him I cared without crossing any lines. I felt a mix of sadness and determination. It was clear that our path was not going to be easy, but I had to try. The next morning, I woke up early and found the courage to approach Ryan as he sat on the couch, playing with his toys in a quiet corner of the house. I walked over slowly, careful not to startle him, and sat down beside him. "Ryan," I said softly, "can we talk?" There was a moment of silence, and I could feel the tension in the air. He looked up at me with eyes that held a mixture of sadness and hope. I opened my heart to him, telling him how much I cared for him and that I wanted to understand his feelings better. I tried not to reveal too much of my own confusion, wanting to keep the focus on him. As the conversation continued, Ryan hesitantly began to speak. He talked about feeling lonely and wanting someone to share his days with, someone who would understand him completely. His words were heavy with longing, and my heart broke a little as I listened. It was difficult to hear him express such deep emotions, but I knew that I had to remain calm and supportive. I wanted him to feel that he could always come to me with his fears and hopes. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I promised him that together we could find a better way to cope with his feelings. There were moments when Ryan would pause, tears threatening to fall from his eyes, and I would gently pat his back, telling him it was okay to feel sad or confused. I reminded him that no matter what, my love for him would never change. Each of his words seemed to open a new door in my mind, and I wondered what hidden hurts lay behind his confession. I carefully listened, trying to catch every detail that could help me understand the depth of his feelings, without making him feel more alone. There were whispers of dreams and fears that he shared, little by little, and with each revelation, I felt our bond strengthen, but also become more complicated. I often caught myself wondering if I was doing the right thing. The fear of making him feel judged or pushing him further away was strong. But Sarah's advice echoed in my mind, to be patient, to listen, and to gently guide him. I remembered how Sarah had said that sometimes the best way to heal a wound is not by patching it up right away, but by understanding how it was hurt in the first place. This thought gave me strength. I continued to ask him open-ended questions, carefully watching his face for clues about his feelings. There were moments when the conversation took unexpected turns. Ryan would speak of times when he felt like no one really saw him or understood him. He described feeling invisible at times, even though I was right there. These feelings hit me hard, and I felt tears welling up as I realized how much he had suffered in silence. I couldn't help but wonder how many times I had been so busy or distracted that I didn't notice. I promised him that I would be more attentive, more present, and that I would seek ways to help him feel valued and seen. During our talks, I brought up memories of happier times, trying to remind him of the good moments we shared. I wanted him to see that we could find joy even in difficult times, and that I was here to support him no matter what. I told him stories of my own childhood, hoping that by sharing my past, he would feel less alone in his feelings. Sometimes his eyes would light up with a glimmer of understanding or hope, and other times they would cloud over with worry. Each reaction pulled at my heart, And I clung to those brief moments of connection as signs that we were making progress. I don't know what to do, and I don't know what to think of it. What are your thoughts on it? I'm curious about other people's opinions on this. And that's why I am telling this story. It is crazy what happened, but I can't deny it. On top of that, I am never able to turn things back.